Gunkichi Tanaka was born in the early 1900s. The Japanese Empire was rapidly accelerating its military expansion. How did the Imperial Army turn men into perfect weapons? The transformation required total isolation. Instructors achieved this through absolute loyalty to the emperor and the complete erasure of mercy. Recruits locked into rigid formations. They recited the oath of allegiance in perfect unison. A single stutter triggered immediate physical beatings. The sharp clack of bamboo swords punctuated the daily combat drills. Officers programmed these exercises to manufacture unfiltered aggression. The 1882 Imperial Rescript to soldiers and sailors officially removed the military from civilian jurisdiction. The army operated inside a closed legal loop. The curriculum relied on strict psychological conditioning. The specific training doctrine dictated that the concept of surrender was legally and morally equated with the total loss of honor. Self-preservation became a court-martial offense. Tanaka absorbed this structural programming. He integrated seamlessly into the officer pipeline. By the mid-1930s, he held the rank of captain. He commanded a frontline infantry company. Tanaka applied the academy's exact stress test parameters to his own troops. He drove his men to the point of exhaustion to sharpen their combat reflexes. Pity was classified as a tactical failure. The Imperial General Headquarters required ruthless efficiency from its mid-level commanders. Tanaka met every operational metric. His ideological conditioning was complete. The High Command processed his deployment orders. Headquarters assigned Captain Tanaka to the 6th Division, under the command of Lieutenant General Hisao Tani. The rigid indoctrination of the 6th Division demanded a physical outlet. Japanese citizens found it on the front pages. Lieutenants Toshiaki Mukai and Tsuyoshi Noda initiated a public contest. The objective was precise: kill 100 people using only a sword. The press printed the execution metrics in grid format. Editors updated the scoreboards daily. The layout deliberately mirrored standard baseball statistics. Tokyo Nichi Shimbun distributed these reports. Circulation reached millions of copies. The state propaganda machine legalized the violence on a national scale. Dismemberment became a recognized sporting event. Captain Gunkichi Tanaka advanced along the same operational vector. He carried a custom-forged sword. He gave the weapon a formal name. He maintained the blade like a personal companion. While the two junior officers staged their competitive executions for the morning editions, the captain methodically compiled his own isolated statistics. His final personal tally ultimately eclipsed the combined records of both celebrated lieutenants. While Tokyo newspapers printed scorecards for sword contests, headquarters engineered the real mechanism of terror on the ground. In the summer of 1937, the tactical reality between Shanghai and Nanjing legalized mass execution at the operational level. What happens to an advancing army when supply chains fail to match the speed of the offensive? Command issues an unspoken directive to survive by any means necessary. Japanese infantry units punched through the collapsing Chinese defense lines. Thick clouds of dust hung over the shattered trenches. The continuous mechanized march crushed the exhausted defenders. The route from Shanghai to Nanjing spans roughly 300 kilometers. This unprecedented pace triggered an immediate logistical collapse. Supply convoys fell behind. Rations ran out. To maintain momentum, field commanders bypassed standard supply protocols, transforming authorized emergency requisitions into systematic, brutal looting across the entire sector. Officers deliberately ignored severe discipline violations. Soldiers torched captured zones. Superiors filed no reports. The rank and file recognized their absolute impunity. Senior generals circulated unspoken directives down the chain of command, ordering frontline units to ignore international warfare laws to sustain the rapid marching pace. Captains like Gunkichi Tanaka utilized this structural collapse. Headquarters stripped away all operational oversight. They operated with total freedom. January 1948. Yuhuatai execution ground. The metallic clank of rifle bolts cuts the air. Captain Gunkichi Tanaka drops down. The freezing winter mud sinks straight through his uniform into his knees. How does a standard officer's blade become the primary physical evidence in a war crimes investigation? The owner simply stops hiding his methods. Operating under a command structure that completely removed operational limits, Tanaka entered Nanjing carrying a single katana. By the time he departed the objective zone, that weapon held a monstrous kill count. The steel exhibited severe structural fatigue. It ceased to function as a standard sidearm. The weapon became a forensic baseline. Investigators bypassed missing deployment logs because the extensive physical damage to the blade precisely corroborated the survivor statements. The Nanjing War Crimes Tribunal officially closed the Gunkichi Tanaka case file. While the 1948 judges read out the verdict, the case materials pulled the timeline back to the initial breach. December 13, 1937, the day the 6th Division shattered the gates of Nanjing. Artillery leveled the southern defenses. Infantry surged through the Zhonghua Gate. The perimeter collapsed. The freezing air of December 1937 carried a dense, suffocating stench. The smell of burning timber from destroyed buildings mixed with the bitter cold. The capital fell. Japanese command structure evaporated. Tokyo issued no restraining orders. Officers on the ground held absolute authority. Foreign observers immediately calculated the survival odds. A small international committee barricaded a 2-square-mile sector, the Nanjing Safety Zone. They marked the borders with Red Cross flags. They sheltered refugees. Outside that fragile perimeter, the streets operated under a different protocol. Systematic, uncontrolled slaughter. No front lines, no tactical objectives, just clearance operations. Captain Gunkichi Tanaka patrolled this unchecked grid. The Nanjing War Crimes Tribunal later mapped his precise actions. He bypassed military targets. He pursued the unarmed. The subsequent documentation completely eradicated the defense of accidental collateral damage. Severing human bone with a cold weapon demands colossal physical exertion, forcing the attacker to pause, realign the edge, and strike again. The blade dulls. Muscles fatigue. Processing victims on this scale requires massive amounts of time. It is an industrial pace of manual execution. One officer killed more than 300 civilians far outside any active combat zone. The official tribunal log assigned to his single sword finalized at exactly 300. These 300 dead did not stem from the kinetic chaos of an urban assault. Captured Japanese documents logged a strict, almost bureaucratic schedule of executions. Why did the High Command fail to stop one officer? They never tried. The Imperial Army system classified his daily quotas as a standard of supreme combat spirit. The killing was a daily regulation. He used a standard officer sword. He executed prisoners until muscle fatigue set in. Then the cycle paused. He returned to his field tent. He sat at a folding table. He ate his standard rations in total calm. The next morning, he issued fresh deployment orders. The sword went back to work. In this operational matrix, systematic extermination required zero concealment. Internal investigations remained procedurally impossible. Post-war investigators later reconstructed this exact timeline. They cross-referenced localized survivor testimony with the captured Japanese documents to map the precise coordinates of the massacre. The data confirmed a continuous, deliberate mechanical process rather than an isolated psychological break. The Army infrastructure actively supported this extermination protocol. The mechanism operated without friction until 1945. Then the empire collapsed. The untouchable executioners abruptly collided with international arrest warrants. Allied military police locked the former frontline commanders inside concrete holding cells. Following the capitulation in September 1945, Allied investigators launched a massive logistical operation to track down specific commanders. The world remembered Tanaka's blade. How do you find one captain among millions of demobilized men? Through cross-referencing Army archives and prisoner testimonies, investigators processed thousands of unit rosters. The Nanjing dossier held absolute priority. By 1947, The search grid narrowed down to a single set of coordinates. American military police located Gunkichi Tanaka in occupied Japan. They executed the arrest. Military authorities processed him at Sugamo Prison in Tokyo. The Allies used this concrete complex as their primary isolation hub. Over 2,000 suspected war criminals passed through its interrogation rooms. The metallic clank of the Sugamo prison grates echoed. Guards escorted Tanaka out. Boots hit the concrete. They secured the perimeter, loaded the high-value target into an armored transport, and drove directly to the naval port. An Allied clerk stamped the extradition transport manifest. Tanaka's surname sat firmly on the passenger roster. The document dictated the destination. The ship crossed the sea. Tanaka returned to Nanjing. The Empire offered no protection. The rank meant nothing. Escorts marched the former officer through the exact streets where the survivors of his massacres still lived and watched. Allied military police physically transferred the prisoner into the custody of Chinese authorities. The sentence was death. The transfer into Chinese custody ended without street vengeance. Absolute legal order replaced the blood-soaked chaos of 1937. The Chinese government opened the Nanjing War Crimes Tribunal in 1946. Tanaka faced the judges. Beside him sat Lieutenants Mukai and Noda. Instead of relying on emotional testimonies, the prosecution built a rigid legal matrix. The continuous rustling of military archives and seized newspaper clippings echoed across the wooden desk of the prosecutor. Analysts mapped, dated, and verified every strike of the sword. Investigators cross-referenced survivor memories with Japanese combat logs. They matched deployment records to captured photographs. The court analyzed the exact mechanics of the slaughter. The evidence proved the officer used his rank and service weapon to systematically execute unarmed targets. It was a documented protocol. The tribunal issued its formal ruling. The judges classified the actions as crimes against humanity. The death sentence severed all diplomatic leverage for Tanaka, Mukai, and Noda. The surrender erased the Japanese Empire. The old command structure ceased to exist. Why was Yuhuatai chosen for the execution? The location functioned as a symbolic state testing ground. For decades, the Kuomintang government utilized Yuhuatai Hill for official state executions. The tribunal required a calculated geographical choice. The execution protocol commenced on the morning of January 28, 1948. Guards extracted Tanaka from his holding cell. Mukai and Noda followed. Soldiers bound their wrists. An armed military convoy transported the three men to the southern edge of Nanjing. The state planned the procedure down to the exact minute to eliminate any margin for error. Zero spontaneity. A surviving photograph documents the final operational phase before the firing squad. The three condemned officers sit together on the ground. They hold their last cigarettes between their fingers. No trace of former military arrogance remains on their faces. A camera flashed. The transfer from the side of the final photograph to the Yuhuatai execution trench took just minutes. But the condemned could no longer walk. Motor functions failed. Guards had to physically drag the three officers to the designated firing line. Tanaka was 42 years old. Mukai and Noda were 35. Their physiological collapse was absolute. The firing squad executed a rigid operational protocol. Marksmen took their positions. Rifles leveled at the targets. A sharp sound of a synchronous weapon volley echoed off the slopes of the hill. Three bodies dropped to the ground. The tribunal required a clinical conclusion. Retribution played no role in the official procedure. Total historical erasure followed the execution. Transport units cleared the zone. Soldiers dumped the remains into unmarked graves within a classified location. 300,000 dead. The nameless graves at Yuhuatai became the definitive legal endpoint for a massacre of that exact scale. On the prosecutor's desk rested a 6-inch stack of paper. One evidentiary folder. It contained the meticulously documented guilt of just one man. What did the trial of an ordinary captain prove? A functioning legal structure can track down a perpetrator even after the absolute collapse of his state. Gunkichi Tanaka was not a supreme commander. He held the rank of captain in the Imperial Japanese Army, a standard operational unit. But the prosecution treated his actions as a systemic breach of international law. Investigators mapped his patrol routes. They secured field photographs. They matched deployment dates to civilian casualty reports. The Nanjing War Crimes Tribunal systematically processed the files of over 1,000 Japanese military personnel. It engineered a direct Asian equivalent to the Nuremberg precedents. The court mechanism stripped away military authority and reduced untouchable occupiers to ordinary defendants. The clerk closed Tanaka's case file. Heavy cotton thread bound the final pages of the verdict together. A rubber archival stamp hit the cardboard cover, a dry, heavy thud against the paper. An archivist logged the serial number. A transport cart carried the sealed folder down into the tribunal's permanent storage vault. The legal process was complete. The time elapsed between the first civilian death in Nanjing and the firing squad at Yuhuatai was exactly 11 years.